Okay, there it is, the Terra Crusher. I'm not really going to give much of an intro here. This is one of the Tamiya Terra Crushers, classic truck, a 2002 vintage nitro monster truck. I've been reading and I've been having this issue myself, and it's really a shame because the truck is great, everything is solid, with the exception of the two-speed forward and reverse fret automatic forward reverse automatic transmission. And the issue a lot of people are dealing with is a slipping transmission from going into first. Just driving in general, the thing slips like mad, and they can't drive the truck. The differentials are good. The wheels are good. Their slippers are tight, and they say, "Oh, maybe your clutch is bad. Oh, maybe your slipper's bad." Well, no. And these Tamiyas had kind of a very finicky transmission, and they did fix it on the later TNX model that came after this. But I see so many people with this problem, and doing my own research, not many people had an answer. I have an answer, and I wanted to help make it common knowledge, spread the word. And I've dealt with this twice. So this is my personal truck. I bought it used. It's got a little bit of a funny story behind it that I didn't discover until it was a little bit too late. But anyways, so the story is I had a guy from work. He had a Tamiya Terra Crusher just like this with the blue body, and he had a hobby shop look at it. They couldn't figure it out. They charged them just to look at it, and they couldn't figure out the slipping transmission. And I did my research. Not much was available. So his was the automatic forward and reverse model. Most of these were from the get-go forward and reverse. They had the really weird Rube Goldberg looking throttle and brake linkage setup. He had that. It was never messed with. Everything was stock, so it's easy to work with. It's easier to work with something when they haven't already taken it apart. So I took his transmission apart. I tried tightening the slipper. There's nothing wrong with the slipper clutch. I checked the engine clutch, as everybody says. Nothing wrong with the engine clutch. And I looked at the drive shaft. Nothing wrong with the drive shaft. The wheels binding up. No. I narrowed it down to the transmission. And his, long story short, I had taken his transmission apart, and it was a lot. There was a lot going on. This is a forward-only transmission, so don't take this for education purposes. Just take this for an example. I don't have his anymore, so I can't use it as an example. But I had his transmission apart. It was still forward and reverse, so it still had all of the reverse linkages, like the shifter fork, and that was all still there. And the reverse part requires a forward clutch. And it also has a shifter fork, and he has a clutch right inside this drum. Sometimes they get a little bit glazed over. Sometimes people over oil. I believe they over oil this from the factory. And what happens is there's a one-way bearing in here, and there's also a normal clutch just like your engine clutch that engages your forward gear. And what happens is that slips, kind of like the classic nitro pull start slippage issue where the one-way bearing begins to slip. Your transmission clutch has the same thing. And inside there's a regular engine clutch in this drum. Let me put the camera down real quick to take this apart and show it to you. There's a transmission clutch and there's a one-way bearing. If I can get this thing off. Okay, there it is. Okay, so let me get the camera back up. So I had already removed the forward clutch, but there is a one-way bearing in there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's pushed all the way in there. And that begins to slip, and that's required to get the forward-reverse automatic action going. So you could, the fix was, long story short, the fix to fix his transmission was buy yourself a can of electronic contact cleaner, CRC, QD electronic cleaner, or the WD-40 specialist contact cleaner. They all do the same thing. They're meant to be safe on electronics. And the reason why I say use that type of solvent over something like brake cleaner or carb cleaner is it's a lot safer on old plastic like this. When you use brake cleaner or carb cleaner, you run the risk of melting stuff, and you don't want that, especially on an old, obsolete truck like this where parts are damn near impossible to find. So I basically put all of his pieces, all of his parts in a little bin, and I just sprayed the crap out of it. Make sure to spray special attention into any of the bearings, any of the clutches, because those are supposed to catch in one direction and slip in another direction. And what happens is oil gets there and it slips, and giving the truck the impression that you have a slipping transmission, because this stupid little setup is slipping. Granted, Tamiya did make a nice looking truck. Everything's really beefy, but their transmission was the weak point, and unfortunately this kind of had too many moving parts, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So if you still have the forward and reverse transmission and you want to keep it forward and reverse, I recommend just spraying everything with some electronic contact cleaner and put a very, very light coat of grease like that. Not like that. You want just enough to coat the gears, but you want just enough to cover the gears, not enough to get in the bearings, because then you're going to end up with a slippage issue. So that was his truck. Now we come with this truck. I bought this truck used off of Marketplace. A gentleman sold it to me, and the truck was like new. If you go underneath, it is like new. There are no scratches anywhere. It's got the OS 18. It's an OS 18. It's not the original engine, but the original stock Tamiya engine was an OS 18. They collaborated with OS, so he went from an OS to an OS, but whatever. And this was it. He did make it forward only. I honestly feel like you're better off if you go with a forward only conversion. But this wasn't done. This was done in a very unconventional fashion. Now you might notice if you already have a Terra Crusher, that's not the stock brake linkage at all. That was modified for a forward and reverse only. Forward only. Back when this was stock, like forward and reverse, you had some other linkages. If you look up an image, there are a lot of people who show how complicated that is, how to adjust it, whatnot. And I was driving it. It was great. I was kind of impressed because there were no slippage. Like, hooray! So it's 2-speed forward, no slippage. Great. But when I braked, it was really choppy. It almost gives you the impression that your diffs are broken, that your front diff is broken. When you give it brakes, it's kind of like bop, 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 bop. And it just sounds terrible. Sounds like something's crunching. And I adjusted my brakes, and unfortunately for me, I went the wrong way. I tightened them instead of loosening the brakes. So by tightening them, it made the brakes clamp onto the brake caliper even harder, and that's what did it in for me. I broke a couple gears. This isn't related to the slipping issue, but this is just something that has something to do with it. And while I was in here, I had this all apart, and I said, hey, this is different. First of all, someone greased this. I never greased it. They don't come greased like this. So the guy definitely greased it. He put way too much. But this was all JB welded. He had JB welded the bearing in there, so I can't get it out. And he had removed the clutch, the forward clutch that goes right here. And this entire assembly was entirely JB welded. I had to chisel and torch and hammer the crap out of this thing to get it all out. But this was all JB welded. So if you wanted to go the forward only method and undo all of the reverse, you can do this. I know there's a forward kit that exists, but this is an almost 17, 18-year-old truck. Forward only kits and forward only transmissions are far and few between, hard to come by. So what this guy did was he removed all of the reverse mechanisms, the throttle linkage, the shifter fork, and all that, and he JB welded this. So that pretty much eliminates all of the slippage that really can exist. This clutch right here, that you don't want to touch that. That's your second gear clutch. That can, be left alone. That wasn't really an issue. It was this clutch right here that has a one-way bearing and a clutch, and that always slipped. That was a part of the reverse mechanism. But being that this is a forward-only transmission, you don't need that. And it's one more moving part out of the way. So this whole thing was JB welded. Because I'm in here, I had to buy some new gears because my brakes just squeezed way too hard in the transmission. If you like the part number, here it is. Feel free to pause the video. Let's see here. There's your part number, 900 4122. And on the front, you know, that's what it looks like. And they give you a nice little sheet of new plastics. Mine had, as I showed you, they had a couple sheared teeth. So those are pretty much trash. But anyways, yeah, so that's how I kind of discovered this was JB welded. This was never an issue. Slippage was never an issue because the guy had already JB welded it. I discovered that because I was changing out the gears. Yeah, so I had to, my gear, the gear that broke was this one right here, the fresh one that you see that doesn't have grease on it yet. Yeah, I thought, because this was all JB welded, I could not access this gear without undoing all of this. You can't undo the shaft from the left side. I had to undo all the JB welded stuff on the right side. And not FYI, nothing dissolves JB weld, especially, and if there is something that dissolves JB weld, it's going to dissolve all your plastics with it. So I just used a chisel, I used a flathead, I used a hammer, and once I got that out, I had to use a torch right on the end of this bell to release the rest of the JB weld or whatever epoxy put in there. I am going to re-epoxy this now that I have the new gear in there, because JB weld is such a pain, a PITA to remove. I'm just going to use some 2-part epoxy. It should do the same job, and I just got to make sure that I get plenty. Well, now it's stuck again, but I got to make sure I goop it up good, both the inside and the outside. Clean with some acetone, clean with some alcohol, and that'll help remove a lot of your slippage. So that's all I really got. You know, just make sure you move any of your excess grease, like all this crap the guy put in there. That's just too much, and it interferes with your slippage issue. So yeah, that's all I got. You know, if you wanted to keep your forward and reverse, I'd say just, you know, use your electronic cleaner, just spray the crap out of it, and put a very, very light coat of very light coat of grease over the gears. But if you did want to go forward only, you could rig it so that the throttle linkage doesn't engage reverse in the transmission, and goop this up so it's locked up and forward. But that's all I really got. I mean, these are really great looking trucks. They are, in my opinion, a classic. But unfortunately, 9 out of 10 of these trucks that I see, they have a slippage issue, and no one puts anything on the internet. And if they do fix it, they don't tell you. You know, the thread kind of dies, and you're kind of left clueless. So this is what I have. This is, you know, some general information I discovered, and I found it to be pretty good. And one last thing is, when you put these back together, back off on the brakes just a little bit. You got 2 Phillips screws here. This is why my gears broke. They put way too much tension on the caliper, so when you just barely tap the brakes, the whole truck wants to lift up and do a friggin' endo. Back off on the screws, and you know, go roll it back and forth after you test it. Adjust the screws accordingly so that when you do pull on the brakes, they aren't squeezing the crap out of the brakes, because these have a dumb system where the drive shaft comes out through here, and this is where the brake caliper is. Instead of putting a brake caliper right along the main drive shaft like normal RC manufacturers like Traxxas would do, they put the brake on one of the secondary shafts in the transmission, and that makes it a lot, that just adds more strain to the inside moving parts, because when the brakes squeeze on the caliper, the braking force goes through this shaft and this shaft before it gets any of the braking power through the wheels and the drivetrain. That's, in my opinion, a dumb design. They should have just had a brake caliper directly on the drive shaft, like the Traxxas T-Max and the HPI Savage and all those other nitro trucks. But you know, this is a pretty neat piece of nitro history. But you know, that's all I got. You know, take those things into consideration, and you know, keep that Terra Crusher crushing. Thanks for watching. Please comment if you have any questions. You know, I really would like to see people get their old Terra Crushers out. You know, I hate to see them just sit because they have some stupid transmission issue. But you know, if you can fix a transmission issue on these things, because that's the main weak link, you got a pretty solid truck. So that's all I got, and thank you for watching.